So when I look at this idea of statism as a religion, I think some people think that that's a little bit strong, like that's going too far. Like a religion, really? And so when we think about what a religion is, there's just a couple of definitions I want to pull out. The belief in and worship of a superhuman controlling power, especially a personal god or gods, or a particular system of faith or worship. And so you might be able to think about, and Americans particularly might look around the world and say, yeah, I'll buy that. I'll buy that some state worship has happened throughout history, but it doesn't really happen in America. Americans don't worship the state. And so I thought I would just lead us through a little visual history to see if maybe there's any state worship going on here. So let's just kind of take a look here. So in America, we have our sacred symbols, our sacred texts, got our saints. There's another one. He's a big saint. We've got our temples, our denominations, our priests. We've got our churches. Thank you. Pastors. We've got common prayer. We've got our televangelists out there. Him too, by the way. There's tithes and offerings. Not quite so voluntary. We have our messiahs and revivals. We've got church discipline when you stray from the gospel of the state. We have our crusades, human sacrifice. I mean, it's got all of the trappings of it's a broad tent that encompasses what exists in religions throughout the world. And I believe that one of the issues that we have in trying to enter this discussion is understanding that many people are unaware of the kind of allegiance and the way that they look to the state as a replacement for God. And I think that we are crafted to worship. I think that's how we're designed. And I say this from the standpoint that I believe when you bottom line it with most people, there is something that they do worship. Now, whether that's just self and their own self-interest, or a government, or a god, a deity, all sorts of different things we can worship. But I believe you can look throughout human history and see that humans exhibit a tendency towards worship. And so I believe that government, and I'm speaking of government as a very generic term, but government itself seeks to embody and replace some of the characteristics of God and take them on for themselves. So I just want to walk through this. This is probably not going to be the deepest exploration here that you're going to get today of these ideas, but here's some ways that I think that the state in America seeks to embody and replace the attributes of God. So, the state is good and just and holy. And I'm going to play a little bit with a couple of verses. Psalm 31:19, "Oh, how great is thy goodness, which thou hast laid up for all them that fear thee." Psalm 145:17, "The state is righteous in all its ways and holy in all its works." Romans 7:12, "Wherefore the law is holy and the commandment holy and just and good." And this idea that the state is this good and benevolent and fair organization. It's a public service full of well-intentioned people who only want to make the world a better place. That the courts of law can be trusted and seen as legitimate venues to resolve disputes with one another and have no ulterior motive. Specifically, when Mike was just talking about states' rights, that the federal courts are somehow representative of we the people, not the federal government and the interests of the federal government. The idea that mediation in issues of person or property could ever be handled in a competitive free market of services is inconceivable. We place confidence in the justice system such that we are comfortable with the state not only as judge but as executioner. And no matter how absurd laws may be, that they are to be obeyed at all costs. So I think these are attributes that people have. These are things that people think about our government as truths that are embodiments of God. I believe some people look at the state as eternal. And I know that sounds crazy, but it's as if they believe John 1:1 says, "In the beginning was the state, and the state was with God, and the state was God." But the concept that the state has always existed and will always exist. So the idea that we could move towards a voluntary or stateless society is inconceivable. It's not even worth discussing. And I'm not here to decide whether or not that's true. But that is on the table. People say, who will build the roads? Who will protect us from our foreign enemies? And most people don't understand what the world could possibly look like if the state in its current form were eliminated or drastically reduced. There's even the saying, right? What are the two certainties in life? Death and taxes. Taxes require a state, So again, even that phrase is sort of a godlike essence to this, right? The state is omnipotent. Romans 1:18, the wrath of the state is revealed from heaven against all unrighteousness of men. And with people, Matthew 19:26, with people this is impossible, with the state all things are possible. Again, I'm just trying to shoehorn this idea into Scripture and see how this parallels, right? So, when we look at the state as all powerful and the state is willing to demonstrate that power when necessary, the state and the wrath of the state is unleashed against those who are unbelievers in its ways, right? And we've been freeing people for democracy around the world for decades through the use of large military force. Many people also believe that the state is the only entity that is worthy or responsible enough to handle weapons of any sort. And I also find it funny, too, when people talk about the United States in particular, and it's like, well, we've got to make sure Iran doesn't have any nuclear weapons, because the United States, we're the good guys in all of this thing. And it's like, wait, who's used the nuclear weapons in history? We don't look, so good in that arena. So the state as all powerful, able to annihilate entire cities or people, and now with precision accuracy with a drone, without due process. So the state is omniscient and omnipresent. 2 Chronicles 16:9, for the eyes of the state run to and fro throughout the whole earth, to show itself strong on behalf of them whose heart is perfect toward it. In Psalm 139:7-8, where shall I go from your spirit, or whither shall I flee from thy presence? If I ascend up into heaven, thou art there. If I make my bed in hell, thou art there. If I take to the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there thy hand will lead me, and thy right hand shall hold me. It's like, if you didn't know that was a Bible verse, you'd think I was talking about the NSA, right? And so the state is this thing that knows all, that sees all, that hears all. But why do you have a problem with that? What do you got to hide, right? So, the state is everywhere. The state is in our homes. The state is involved in our food, in our families, our children's educations, our bedrooms. All of these places are the purview of the state. Where you stand is holy ground. Take off your shoes. That is the state's domain. And so the state is omnipresent and omniscient. The state is provider. The state shall supply all your need according to its riches and glory. And we have been in this nation that there's been this slow, crazy process through which, social programs and entitlements and the social welfare state has grown and expanded and has reached into so many areas of life. And in the process of that, the church has been crowded out. And so, sometimes people ask, well, what if we got rid of the social welfare state, what would we do? And the response is, well, we'd let people die in the streets like they did before. Which didn't happen. That's not what happened before the New Deal, okay? I mean, before this all began, there were people and organizations and charitable groups who helped mankind. We had a different sense of community back then, too. I believe that the breakdown of the community in the United States is a big, big problem. It's not a problem that we have to somehow legislate to solve. I'm just saying it's an issue that has changed how we interact with people. And so many of us live in neighborhoods and in cities where we barely know the people that we are around. And so the idea that we would help others out and do things for others through our own sense of charity and through our own sense of responsibility. And I believe this thing is true for the church, and I believe many people now say, why would I give? That's what I pay my taxes for. And yet, that is the most impersonal way that care can be given in this society. Facelessly, administratively, bureaucratically. And so, the state as provider has been a way that not only has it been detrimental, but it has removed the opportunity for people who are helped out to be directed toward the church and the people of God. Because the state truly is their provider. It didn't come from a voluntary, caring community of people that they know who have been changed by the gospel and have shared out of their own resources to help those in need. And I think that could also speak to why we have seen a major decline in people being receptive to the gospel and to the church and the work the church does. The state is healer. Will provide for your health and well-being. Right now, it's very popular to be critical of the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare. And many conservatives are, and you've got a right to be critical of it, don't get me wrong, but they fail to realize that Medicare Part D under Bush was the largest federal expansion of intervention in healthcare in history. So it's just been a series of one-upping this thing. And those of us who believe in free markets and that markets have the ability to expand access and lower cost in every area that has been allowed to function, we look around and see the areas in which costs have continued to grow and skyrocket. We look at those areas, we say, what does it have in common? University, healthcare, all these different things. It's the hand of government. It's the hand of intervention and regulation that is often what is preventing people from being able to have access to these things. It's true in the entire area of welfare. The organization that claims to want to help the least of these the most, the state, and those who promote it, are actually hurting and hindering those people from actually having fulfilling lives and well-being. And so the state is healer. The state is also immutable, unchanging. And, it's interesting because the Supreme Court, I was thinking about this the other day. The Hobby Lobby decision came down, right? And that was like this big deal, and everybody was like divided on this issue. And there was even, I heard, the Democrats were like, well, we're going to draft something to overturn that ruling. And I was like, great. Why don't you overturn Gonzalez versus Raich, which was the decision that made California's legal marijuana officially against the law, and Wickard versus Filburn, which was the ruling back in the 40s that it was illegal to grow wheat in opposition to the state on your own property. Like, it's like, sure, let's just overturn these decisions. These are not immutable. Just because the Supreme Court says something is constitutional doesn't mean it is, doesn't mean it's right. And I'm not specifically speaking about the Hobby Lobby decision, whether or not that was right or wrong. I'm just saying people go forward and they're like, we have this history of ex cathedra communication from the Supreme Court. And that is the final saying on the issue. 9 judges in dresses who are appointed, And the reason everybody wants to control, the presidency and the House and Senate, all the time they're like, well, we're going to get to appoint some new Supreme Court judges, and that way they'll make decisions that we like and the other team doesn't. And that's the way it's seen. It's like that our entire federal system and that our constitutional system was set up in such a way that at the end of the day, 9 dudes or women get to decide it. That was not the way that it was designed, but the federal government and the state believes that it is immutable. And many people see the work of the government and the sayings as immutable. And so I kind of want to close on this because I started by saying, by saying that statism is a religion, am I going too far? And then by saying that in America, statism is a religion, am I going too far? And I tried to show that maybe this was accurate representation of what's going on. But the real question is the religion of statism an idol poised in the middle of the church in America? Does the church in America have an unholy allegiance to the state because of a misunderstanding of certain dimensions of Scripture, because of the hijacking of Scripture by politicians, because of the narrow-minded viewpoints on certain issues that they don't see in the larger context of freedom and liberty and individual choice? I don't know if any of you have been to a church service on Veterans Day or the 4th of July recently, but sometimes it looks like an American flag exploded in the sanctuary. And I don't know, I want to challenge Christians to ask ourselves whether we should say the Pledge of Allegiance. We definitely shouldn't say indivisible, in my opinion, but that's a different topic. But what are the things that we do as Christians out of a sense of national pride that culturally it's been communicated that this is how we are to conduct ourselves? And at what point do we start talking about issues such as foreign policy and military intervention, and even talking to those Christians who are engaged in the military and gently, not abrasively, in my estimation, talk to them about how does this fit into the Christian philosophy of nonviolence? How does this fit when it comes to God's eternal plan and our understanding about the souls of men who are murdered for the cause of empire? These things are conversations I think we need to have. I don't think we need to get people to agree with me, but I think we need to talk about it. I think in the church, the question of how much and how do we honor veterans, and is it biblical? That's an open question. I'm not saying you should or shouldn't, but I'm saying what's the manner? And us taking time to look through our own lives and say, what are the areas in which I have placed the state on a pedestal that it does not deserve to be on? And how revolutionary to the power structure was the gospel of Jesus Christ? And what does that need to look like for us? So with that, I'm going to end, and if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer those.